Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for your support for this broken down flyboy. This one has got me fired up. Those rogue judges who think they are some kind of emperor. They think they control the whole Congress, House, and Senate. And the entire executive. Why do we need a Congress or a president when we have these judges? Just fire them all and let the rogue judges do everything. Let me show you what I mean. Then, please, leave a comment. Like and subscribe. Thank you.
The judicial crack-up, SCOTUS's unplayed card. Ron says, looks like the Supreme Court is going to have to tiptoe even a bit more out of that comfort zone it loves so much and reshuffle the deck. The Constitution requires nothing more than that judges get paid forever. It does not require the whole nation have to pay forever for unhinged judges. After all, Ron writes, isn't it all about protecting the institution? Our own feckless, unelected, black-robed, tyrannical, inferior federal court judges, many of whom seem to have utterly lost their legal and human sensibilities as a result of acquiring a case of societally threatening Trump derangement syndrome. We've talked about the use of impeachment to remove these judges, but we don't have 67 votes. We've talked about the prospect of removing them for failing to serve during good behavior as demanded by Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, something that's never been done before. Now we can enjoy the keen insight of my friend, my colleague, indeed my own lawyer, Ron Coleman, who's written a fantastic column on a third path by which America might go about saving itself from this plague of rogue judges, and to do it in a manner that's both constitutional and which impeachment would be, and perhaps actually practicable, which removing for failing to serve during good behavior might be difficult to pull off. All right, and I'll make it a bit bigger. Now, again, of course, obviously, this is Ron's work, right? I'm reading Ron's work. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. Again, you should follow him on X, at Ron Coleman, and on YouTube, Ron Coleman Law. The judicial crack-up, SCOTUS's unplayed card. Everyone knows, Ron writes, what a train wreck certain district court judges are making of the legal system in their social, emotional, sociopathic eagerness to contribute to left-wing lawfare. What to do? Everyone knows Article 3 judges can't be fired or recalled. Impeachment, and by the way, I'm not that sure about firing, as I just talked about, being removed for failing to serve during good behavior. But in any case, impeachment is certainly possible, but it is fraught. The U.S. Constitution provides little guidance as to what offenses constitute grounds for the impeachment of federal judges. As with other government officials, judges may be removed following impeachment and conviction for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Otherwise, under Article 3, Section 1, judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. And by the way, this is, of course, true. There is no definition of what's an impeachable offense. It's really a political judgment. It's not really a legal judgment. They phrase it in legal terminology, right? You can be impeached and convicted for treason, bribery, other crimes, other high crimes and misdemeanors. But what's a high crime? It doesn't say felony. The founders knew what a felony was. And even if it meant felony, then they add misdemeanor. So what it really means is any president, any government official can be impeached for any reason. It's purely a political judgment. It's why I laugh every time I hear liberals complain about Trump and they're like, well, that's an impeachable offense. Everything's an impeachable offense if the opposition party has the votes. They can impeach Trump for tying his shoelaces the way they now prefer. That would be an impeachable offense if they have enough votes to secure impeachment. All right, Ron continues. It's vague and it's a political nuclear option that no one wants to take in a world of narrow and uncertain congressional majorities. We may get there someday, but electorally speaking, we are not there yet. He means impeachment. This is even more true now that more and more appellate courts, including SCOTUS, and however belatedly, are stepping up to the plate. So I think what he's suggesting here is we're seeing Trump ultimately win against the lawfare, either on appeal at the Court of Appeals or at the Supreme Court. And if you were a congressman or a senator and you were being asked to vote to impeach a judge, you might just say to yourself, well, the judge is obviously crazy, but the damage he's able to cause appears limited because he's getting reversed by the Court of Appeals and by the Supreme Court. And why should I expend the political capital to impeach a judge if he's being held in check anyway? Ron then quotes Margot Cleveland. So what happened here is the unelected black-robed tyrannical inferior district trial court judge ruled against Trump on the Alien Enemies Act. The 3-judge Court of Appeals panel ruled against Trump 2-1. But instead of going to the Supreme Court, now we're going to go en banc. So this is put here in Ron's column because it's an example of some of these runaway judges, the trial judge and the 2-1 Court of Appeals panel that are engaged in lawfare that ruled against Trump. They're being held in check, at least at the moment. Somebody had written, a loss in court for the Trump administration. Judge suspends administration's plan to eliminate hundreds of jobs at the Voice of America's parent agency. And I responded to that saying, despite dozens of losses for Trump, we always have those headlines, at the hands of unelected black-robed tyrannical inferior district trial court judges appointed by Biden and Clinton. Many of these judges not even born in the U.S. and maintaining foreign citizenship. Despite all those losses for Trump at the trial level, Trump is currently 20-0 at the Supreme Court. So again, he's being held in check. Ron continues, all the same, almost every day, the madness continues. And now he's citing a decision we got yesterday, which is really insane. People here on a student visa at places like Columbia University, they come here on a student visa. They're 37 years old. And they enroll as students at Columbia University. And then they lead protests against the American national interest. They protest for Palestine, against Israel. And you might think that's fine, except they are guests in our country. America has a national interest and a national policy. And just like if you have any guest in your home, your guest in your home doesn't get to talk shit about your wife, right? He may have freedom of speech. Maybe he can say shit about your wife when he's at the corner bar, but he can't do it in your house. And so these illegal migrants come into America, legal on a student visa, and then advocate for the destruction of Western civilization, which in theory we're a part of. And it's the right of the American government to say, listen, we gave you a visa to be a student, or we gave you a visa to work, or we gave you a visa for a particular reason. We didn't give you a visa so you could come here and lead protests against our government. You're here at our pleasure. And now it's not our pleasure to have you here anymore. You're gone. So we've been deporting these foreign legal migrant agitators against our national interest, and they sued in federal court. And this judge got all upset about it. He wrote a 161-page opinion here. The whole opinion is insane. And J.T. Alexander here notes, while leftists in robes keep devolving into unprofessional insanity, the actual jurists are becoming spicier with how nimbly they verbally rebuke their unhinged peers. So, he says, a sort of judicial civil war is brewing in the courts. All right, back to Ron. Ron writes, so did I say you can't fire a federal judge? I did say that. But what really is fire? The Constitution doesn't say anything about what kind of work a judge has to be assigned. It only says this, quote, the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall, at stated times, receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Close quote. In other words, you can't cut their salaries. That's all it says. And it doesn't say any more. But as we have seen, being fired while still being paid is a real thing. And he quotes here from Variety, when Tucker Carlson was fired by Fox, they fired him, but they had to keep paying his salary. $20 million a year. Pretty good, Tucker. I didn't know he was paid that much money. Ron continues, you know what else is a thing? Removing a lower court judge from a case he simply can't be trusted with anymore. And it's not just a thing I made up. It's actually happened. Most notably in 2013 in a case that, like today's lawfare docket, had important public policy implications. And he gives this example. Second Circuit removes highly respected judge without prompting from high visibility stop and frisk case. November 24th, 2013, the Second Circuit, quoting an article here, the Second Circuit has unexpectedly removed Shira Scheindlin, a highly respected district court judge of over 20 years, an avid proponent of civil liberties, as presiding judge on Floyd versus City of New York, the highly controversial case challenging NYPD's stop, question, and frisk policy. No party in the case requested Judge Scheindlin's removal. In removing Judge Scheindlin and reassigning the case, Floyd, to another district judge, the Second Circuit panel found that she had engaged in conduct that runs afoul of the Federal Judicial Code of Conduct. That's the rules of behavior for federal judges. Rules, by the way, written by Article 3 judges. So this is not rules by Congress imposed on the judge or by the president imposed on the judges. Article 3 writes its own code of conduct for its own judges. The article continues. At the heart of the Second Circuit's sua sponte, meaning unprompted, decision to reassign Floyd to another judge are certain statements made by Judge Scheindlin during a conference held in 2007 in the case Daniels versus City of New York, and the publication of certain media interviews given by her while Floyd was pending. The earlier Daniels case was the first lawsuit filed against New York City challenging its stop and frisk policy, which settled in 2004 when the city agreed to implement a written policy governing its stop and frisk practices and to improve officer training. During a 2007 conference in that earlier case of Daniels, Judge Scheindlin denied the plaintiff's motion to extend the settlement terms and generally discussed the plaintiff's options of filing a new lawsuit against the city if they believed it was violating its stop and frisk written policy, and that such newly filed case could be marked as related to Daniels, so she would get it back, and that she would accept its assignment. In the media report cited by the Second Circuit as a basis for the removal, Judge Scheindlin never commented on the merits of Floyd, but merely addressed public attacks made against her by proponents of the city's stop and frisk policies. While it's within the Second Circuit's power to reassign a case to another judge in the normal course, such reassignment is strictly procedural and unlikely to impact the merits of a case. However, the Second Circuit's panel removal decision in Floyd is striking because not only could it form the basis for invalidating two crucial decisions that directly affect the constitutional rights of minorities in New York City, but could also have the unintended effect of putting district court judges on the defensive and curbing their judicial independence. Now back to Ron. Judicial independence. Something we perhaps have had a bit too much of these days, it is fair to say. Then he quotes Sean Davis, quoting Marco Cleveland, quoting Judge Murphy, Brian Murphy, another liberal judge, I believe, who's out of Massachusetts, who's in open rebellion against the Supreme Court. So the small text here, I'll just summarize for you. This guy had issued an injunction against Trump. It went to the Supreme Court. They reversed the injunction, stayed the injunction, froze the injunction. And then they remanded it back to Judge Murphy, the trial judge, and he just made up another reason to issue another injunction. So Margot Cleveland, who does great work, you should follow her on X, says, holy crap, the judge sidesteps SCOTUS. And Sean Davis writes, a federal judge just issued an order explicitly and blatantly ignoring the Supreme Court ruling today, allowing deportations to continue, claiming without evidence that the Supreme Court ruling is irrelevant to the case because the issue wasn't properly before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, Ron writes, has noticed this problem. Another X post. In yesterday's SCOTUS ruling allowing the government to stop grants through the NIH, Justice Gorsuch wrote, quote, lower court judges may sometimes disagree with this court's decisions, but they are never free to defy them. And either way, when this court issues a decision, let's see if it's right here, it constitutes a precedent that commands respect in lower courts. The hierarchy of authority runs downhill, folks. The trial courts are bound to obey the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and of course the Court of Appeals are bound to obey the Supreme Court. These unelected black-robed tyrannical inferior district trial court judges are simply in open rebellion against our constitutional order. Continuing with Ron, and not only conservative justices see the need to remind their black-robed, unelected black-robed, tyrannical, inferior district trial court judges how the hierarchy thing works. Even Justice Elena, no, I've never been married, never had kids. Why do you ask? Kagan shockingly agreed, at least with the outcome. She didn't like the earlier decision, but she admitted a district court can't enforce an order that the Supreme Court has stayed or frozen. That's a pretty basic point, Rod Martin points out. I mean, this is like, basic civics, certainly first year law school. That's a pretty basic point, but it had to be made because Democratic judges are ignoring it. Back to Ron. Well, the time has come. And if the Second Circuit can look at the record of a case and determine that even a seasoned, distinguished friend of theirs can't handle a case objectively, indeed, its 2013 panel ruling was upheld by the circuit en banc, the whole circuit, so can the Supreme Court. The beauty of this solution, of course, is that it does not implicate the constitutional separation of powers. It is merely the judiciary doing appropriate judicial hygiene in its own house, as it has done in the case of Judge Pauline Newman. Another case here, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit suspended Judge Pauline Newman from hearing new cases amid a deepening clash over the 96-year-old jurist's mental competence to serve on the bench. Not everyone, Ron writes, not everyone is enamored of this outcome, to put it mildly. Mike Davis, also a good follow on X, writes, today the en banc U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit is considering a key Trump tariffs case. But guess what? The Democrat-controlled court has illegally sidelined Judge Pauline Newman, a Reagan appointee. On Monday, they just re-upped Judge Newman's illegal suspension for another year. Why? They pretend she's not mentally fit, despite 3 separate doctors opining she's perfectly capable of continuing her judicial service. By the way, Mike Davis is conservative. This is a clear partisan judicial coup. Obviously, these Democrat judges don't want Judge Newman voting on Trump's tariff case. In another post of Mike Davis, I had several-hour discussion with Federal Circuit Judge Pauline Newman, a remarkable woman. Unbelievably, several of her colleagues conspired to remove her from her judicial duties. Ron continues, as much as I appreciate Mike's view on this, there does come a point where some judges simply have to go. As the sad situation involving the towering Judge Richard Posner reminds us. So most of you won't know who Posner is unless you went to law school. I went to law school. I graduated law school in 1991, folks. That was a hot minute ago. Even way back then, our biggest textbook on torts, on civil lawsuits, was authored by Posner. Posner. This was 35 years ago. He was a towering figure in the 1980s writing these textbooks. And mine was not a first edition. He'd done several editions before that. He was considered a giant in the legal academic profession and on the federal bench. He made it all the way up to the Court of Appeals in the Seventh Circuit, which is the Chicago area and surrounding, which is like a half step short of being on the Supreme Court. That's how big a deal Judge Posner was. So Ron quotes here, when Judge Richard Posner, who remains the most cited, opens new tab legal scholar on record, when he abruptly retired from the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2017, the legal world was stunned. What no one knew or didn't publicly say was that at about 6 months later, the prominent jurist, who was 78 at the time, received a confirmed diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. I actually didn't know that. That's very sad. Yeah, that's very unfortunate. And Ron writes, well, Alzheimer's is terrible, and Posner's was a great legal mind before it was struck. But where exactly did this 2016 op-ed by him fit into his journey of mental fitness? How far gone was he? And now he's quoting Posner. And on another note about academia and practical law, I see absolutely no value to a judge of spending decades, years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, or seconds studying the Constitution, the history of its enactment, its amendments, and its implementation across the centuries. Well, just a little more than 2 centuries, and of course less for many of the amendments. 18th century guys, however smart, could not foresee the culture and technology of the 21st century. In other words, Posner here is arguing to throw out the entire Constitution. It's irrelevant to our modern lives. Continuing with Posner, quote, which means that the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the post-Civil War amendments, including the 14th, do not speak to today. David Strauss is right. The Supreme Court treats the Constitution like it is authorizing the court to create a common law of constitutional law based on current concerns, not what those 18th century guys were worrying about. In short, let's not let the dead bury the living. Close quote. Ron continues. Well, just as there's fired and there's fired, there's dead and there's dead. Quoting now Larry, the great and powerful Larry Elder, Larry writes, finally, an admission of the obvious. It's not complicated. Dems, media, academia, Hollywood, most of big tech lied about Biden's in full view diminished mental capacity because they believed and still believe a cognitively impaired Biden is clearly preferable to a fascist Trump. And then this, watch. John Ossoff admits that he knowingly lied to the nation about Joe Biden's cognitive decline because beating President Trump was more important to him. Georgia, your senator lied to you because he cares more about Democrats having power than our state's national interests. Well, this is worth watching. Let's take a look, a listen.
We just didn't listen to the mounds and mounds of data that was out there.
I think that like the most brutally honest answer to that question is, you know, when you're facing the specter of Donald Trump potentially being reelected to the presidency, and you have in the sitting president the presumptive nominee, it's understandable that you're not going to be inclined to do or say things that might weaken that presumptive nominee against Trump, given the threat that he posed and poses. But
unbelievable. Ron writes, and are we there now? Are we there now? Again, with this crazy judge's 161-page decision. After he writes his decision, after he signs it, he writes, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for writing it. Shows you care. You should. Sincerely and respectfully, Bill Young. P.S. The next time you're in Boston, the postmark on the card is from the Philadelphia area. Stop in at the courthouse and watch your fellow citizens sitting as jurors. We reach out for justice. It's here. And his courthouse is just like this one. Both state and federal, spread throughout our land, that our Constitution is most vibrantly alive. For it is well said that where a jury sits, there burns the lamp of liberty. This judge, William Young, federal judge, appointed by Reagan in Massachusetts, 80-something years old, began and ended, framed, bookended his 161-page opinion with a postcard threat that he felt necessary to respond to in an opinion. And then he PS'd it at the end, referring back to the postcard. Is this a mentally sound person? Does this guy need to be removed from the bench for mental unsoundness? And Ron says, yes, this is not a normal act for a judge, my friends. I've been in the law 34 years, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. I've never seen this done. Never. And I read more appellate opinions than probably most lawyers do, just given the nature of my work. Ron says, looks like the Supreme Court is going to have to tiptoe even a bit more out of that comfort zone it loves so much and reshuffle the deck. The Constitution requires nothing more than that judges get paid forever. It does not require the whole nation have to pay forever for unhinged judges. After all, Ron writes, isn't it all about protecting the institution?